Hello, my friends, and welcome. My name is Amanda Rude, and I am a content manager at LinkedIn Learning, and I'm very excited to be here today with two incredible LinkedIn Learning instructors, Natalie Nixon and Ron Carrucci. Ron is a best-selling author and managing partner. Oh, goodness, let me get my notes. Managing partner of the consulting firm Novalent and instructor of the new LinkedIn Learning course, Effective Collaboration Across Teams. And Natalie is the CEO of Figure Eight Thinking, a creativity strategist, a Real Leaders Top 50 keynote speaker, and award-winning author. She also recently published her latest LinkedIn Learning course, Managing Cross-Functional Collaboration as a Leader. And today we are going to be talking about all things teaming and collaboration. So I wanted to start with this question. You know, I work at a big organization. I'm often starting new projects with new cross-functional teams, and wanted to just set the foundation with this question for each of you. What is the first thing that you would recommend for a team to do when starting a project together? Natalie, I'm going to have you go first, and then we'll jump to your thoughts, Ron.
Sure thing. And can you hear me fine?
You sound perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. There are two things that popped into my head. I think the very first thing when people convene on a collaborative project is to actually, in the process of getting to know one another, is to outline what ticks them off and how they like to communicate. And as maybe minor as this may seem, sometimes there's breakdown because, just send it in an email, or please, no more email. I would prefer texting, or pick up the phone. So just kind of understanding what are my quirks, what are my preferences, what's a dream way for how I like to communicate is I think a really basic and also great place to start to avoid internal passive aggressive breakdown down the line. And then I'll listen to Ron, and I share one more after Ron.
Yeah, Ron.
I love that one, Natalie. And great to be with you, Amanda. Thanks for having us here today to talk about something clearly Natalie and I are both pretty passionate about. Yeah. The thing that I find the most fascinating about new teams starting up is when you go around and ask them to define what will success look like. Because what you immediately begin to hear is how each of them are defining success from the vantage point of their function. It's like, in other words, you don't have a team, you have the UN there. Yeah. And they're all representing different interests. And so all of a sudden you now have very competing views of what success is, and you've got to get to a shared understanding of what are we all here to do together. Now, what interest am I here to represent for my function? And you have to get that out of the way from the very beginning. Otherwise, all the problems that Natalie just described will appear quickly because they'll all be working at cross purposes with each other. So define a shared sense of what success will look like when you're done.
Yeah. The way I was going to say that is where do we want the plane to land, which is another way of saying what does success look like. And you quickly learn where there's divergence and where there's convergence, and that's the beginning of the work in creating the shared vision.
Yeah. And that is really helpful too, Natalie, because I think so often, and to your point about sort of function, Ron, oftentimes a team convenes and everyone becomes really preoccupied with the actions that are going to happen. So like, let's create a list of actions and we're all going to feverishly start doing things and acting on things. But to your point, Natalie, like, what is our ultimate objective? Like, what are we acting towards? What is sort of our mission, and what will success look like when we all, get there? Natalie, I also really like your point around communication, and that, really understanding where will people respond. Some people love asynchronous communication. Some people really like synchronous communication. Some people don't mind if you send them a message at 9 o'clock at night. Other people are going to feel extreme physical stress if they start receiving messages at 9 o'clock at night. So yeah, it makes sense to really outline that too, so that everyone can communicate in a way that's effective. Ron, I think that you were starting to get at this idea, but one thing that you really focus on in your new course is this idea of having new teams outline the value that they create together. Can you talk a little bit about that and how teams can do it?
Yeah. Quite often when you bring teams together collaborate across their functions, they show up as analytics and engineering, or product and customer success, or supply chain and operations, or marketing and sales. And they don't realize that at those seams, I call them the seams of the organization, that's where competitive value is created, right? So an organization that is going to compete on service, that service is created at the intersections of logistics, customer service, and probably sales. A company that's going to compete on innovation, right? Innovation comes together at the intersections of customer analytics, R&D, and marketing. When you show up at that seam and you don't understand that together that we are 1 + 1 + 1 = 5, then it becomes 1 - 1 - 1 = -3. And so you have got to quickly understand that when we come together, we're a different thing. I'm no longer just analytics. You're no longer just customer success. I'm no longer operations. You're no longer supply chain. We're a different thing together. We have to start from the premise that we create this thing for the organization that we could not create on our own. And if we're going to do that together, we have to do it in a certain way. We have to be good at certain things, which maybe we're not good at. We have to trust each other. We have to resolve conflict. We have to clarify who gets to make what decisions. We have to have service level agreements. And what's so funny is I brought together so many teams together who are in the middle of bad border wars, just rivalries and hate each other and can't stand each other. And when you bring them through the process, a couple of teams I'm thinking about in client situations where they came together, in fierce, they thinking, they objectified and othered each other. They, each other annoyed each other. And when you begin to amalgamate them, you hear things like, "Oh, that's why you need that?" Or, "Oh, no wonder I drive you crazy. I didn't know that's what you did with that."
Yeah.
Or even the basics. "That's what you guys do?" Like, they don't even know what each other does. They don't even know each other's worlds. They speak different languages.
Yeah.
And so you show up at this seam under the guise of creating this competitive muscle for the organization without any understanding of how to do that. And it becomes well, they didn't get it to me on time. Well, they can't do their damn jobs. Well, we don't use the same systems. Well, our KPIs compete. You want traffic and I want conversion. So, and so you look at all these designed in conflicts that people say are interpersonal. So let's do team building. And I'm like, this is not a team building issue. You've designed this to be at war. If you would like it to be harmonized and work, design it that way. And seems to be effective to create that value have to be designed.
And what would you say would be effective questions for a new team or a converging team to ask in order to get at and better understand this shared value creation?
So the first one is, what is it that we can do together? What's the deliverable we co-create that we couldn't create on our own? And how does that directly connect to the organization's strategy? In other words, if the organization has committed to these things this year, to certain outcomes or metrics or results, what is it that we do together that contributes to that? What do we have to be good at to deliver that? And then once you've defined that shared reality, now we've created a new thing. So now we have a we. It's not 2 days.
Yeah.
Now it's, okay, well, how are we going to do that? How often do we have to meet? Who gets to make what decisions? What are the things we have to get really good at to deliver that value? And let's be honest about the things that we're not that good at now. Who gets to make what? Where are we going to have decision strangulation, or where are we going to fight?
Yeah.
How are we going to escalate, and how are we not going to escalate? The up and over thing. I tell my boss to fight with your boss. And what commitments do we need to make with each other? Do we need to? You need this report every Wednesday by 8 p.m. I need from you the following data sets by this time in order for me to produce this part of my work. We need to meet every 3 weeks to look at the pipeline. Design in the relationship to do what you've asked for it to do. Don't just leave it to chance.
Yeah. And to your point too, just actually understanding the job done by your collaborative partners, I think is hugely valuable in terms of empathy. I remember shortly after I started at LinkedIn Learning, I learned about an exercise that the content managers would do where they would actually prep something and then practice recording, like under the lights, the way that LinkedIn Learning instructors do. And, we work with instructors all the time. We develop ideas with them, we develop relationships, but it's this whole other layer of understanding understanding of someone's work when you actually like stand there and you're like, oh, this is what it's like to record a course. And with that, you also develop this deeper understanding of all your cross-functional partners who work on the courses and record the courses and direct them too. So yeah, definitely can understand the value.
I often recommend walking into each shoes. Go shadow for a day what they do. Go spend a day in their life. Follow them around. Watch what they do. Listen to their language, and appreciate the challenges they face that you don't.
Yeah, that's so valuable. Natalie, one thing I really want to talk with you about is I think I've, in different organizations, different times, and talking to friends who work at different companies, oftentimes you'll get this cross-functional team together. You get a group of people together. It's time to start a project. And it's like, all right, let's come up with some great ideas, everybody. And what I really would love to know is like, how we know that innovation is really important. We know that creativity is really important. We may, conceptually understand that a group of people can do that together, but practically and functionally, how can we be creative and innovative as a team? And maybe especially as a new team that's just converging for the first time.
Well, I'm a big proponent of spending, if we follow the Pareto rule, spending 80% of the time in a project and really honing in on problem definition. Have we even asked the right questions? So when you were asking Ron earlier about what are the questions that we should be asking, I actually like to spend a bit more time in the space of divergent questions of why are we doing this? What if we tried X instead of B? How might we, right? Because too often in our organizations, we get to the tactical convergent questions such as, what do we want to do? By when are we going to do it? Who's responsible? We will get there, but actually all of those very tactical sorts of questions don't matter if we haven't created the problem collaboratively, co-created it, and really kind of given ourselves the space and time to dream. Because when else are we going to do that? There's always going to be the space and time to edit down because of limited resources in time, limited resources in budget, limited resources in talent, because people move and are quite fluid in an organization. So the way I like to think about building a creative capacity, especially in a team project, is to really build our muscle for inquiry, for question asking, because as you've already hinted at, that curiosity is the precursor to empathy. We actually can't empathize with that colleague who works in a different department until, as Ron was sharing earlier, we really understand why they do what they do. Similarly, being open to receiving questions helps us to challenge our own assumptions so that we can truly start with a clean slate. One of the biggest death tolls in organizations is all the jargon that we have. And we don't even understand anymore why we call the ABC of XYZ. So even being able to ask those why questions and suspend judgment, that's a term I like to normalize a lot. Suspending judgment of ourselves and of our colleagues really helps us to begin the process of truly creatively going about building a project. So really spending 80% of the time in question framing. Did we even ask the right question before we go down this rapid rabbit hole of solution? So that's a big part of where we start. And then the other thing I would just add to that is that innovation is only as good as the inputs that we bake in. Ron was talking about how certain systems, a lot of systems that are designed, sometimes they're designed to fail. Oftentimes they're not designed to build in what I call the wonder as well as the rigor. That's how I think about creativity. It's our capacity and ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And rigor is different from rigidity. Sometimes people think they're being quite rigorous and actually they're being a bit rigid. So if we want to innovate, we have to diversify the inputs. One of the greatest inputs we can have in a collaborative project are the questions that we're asking. So if we keep asking the same questions, we're going to keep getting the same outputs or the same answers. And how do you begin to ask different questions? You surround yourself with different sorts of people. So having that inter-team collaboration. Maybe it's even people from outside of the company who can periodically opt into the process will also help to really stir innovation in some interesting ways.
I mean, it's so, in some ways it may feel intuitive, but I don't know how often we all practice it. You know, curiosity means curiosity supplants your assumption that you already completely understand and know something, right? And I think that that's an interesting thing that can happen too, is it's like, I know you, I know your team, I know what you do already, I know what we're trying to accomplish. And it's like, if you step back, you're like, well, is that actually true? You know, like, can you create some space to gain new information about this?
Sorry, can I just also just say that part of what is so difficult about collaboration is that it is acutely ambiguous. It really is. We don't know what the outcome will be. We have a plan of where, as I said earlier, where we want the plane to land, but there's so many other variables interpersonally, in the marketplace, organizationally, that we have to contend with. And I would love it if we, as humans and organizations are organisms because they're made up of humans, if we began to really accept that ambiguity and wrestling with ambiguity and getting new tools to navigate that ambiguity, i.e. collaboration, is actually going to be the beginning of true innovation. The best innovation comes when we explore those uncertain realms, those areas where we don't know the answer, and being okay with not knowing the answer.
You know, I think, Natalie, one of the things that gets in the way of that is the very thing you said, Amanda, which is the knowledge I think I have. And one of the things that we do with our clients is to say, what is it you think you know? Because if they're honest about those, they are just drenched in biases. You know, they're not very competent at their jobs, or they're the ones that are always late, or they're always self-promoting themselves, or that leader's really out to advance his career. You have a ton of knowledge that you've acquired that you've then gone about proving, right? The confirmation bias is rampant in collaborations, and people don't stop to say, how do we test the assumptions we have about each other? Because you'll never get to all the brilliant things Natalie's talking about in terms of wonder and curiosity and suspending judgment if you don't even admit that you have judgment in the first place. Yeah. So you can't suspend judgment you haven't admitted you have.
Yeah. And
if you don't begin by saying, yeah, I've kind of thought about you guys as the lazy ones, or I've kind of thought about you guys as the uncooperative ones. And there may have been an experience that set that bias in motion, but now you've gone about proving it. And it's the only thing you think you know.
Yeah. And I like that too, because I think part of what you need to do is just make conscious acknowledgement of what you're bringing to the project. Natalie, I think even just saying, beginning a whole new project with a new group of people embarking on something like this is ambiguous. And like recognizing that and owning that, I think reduces a great amount of the anxiety associated with that ambiguity versus having that sort of be, unconscious. Likewise, Ron, sort of bringing all these suppositions about how something should be done or how other teams function, but not even consciously sort of taking ownership of that certainly can affect and sort of taint, how things work functionally in a group. One thing that I would love to hear from both of you on is sort of how you think about conflict within teams, because, it's not that often that I'll be like, catching up with a friend and they're like, I'm working on this team project and I just want to tell you about how great we're, what you tend to hear about is personalities or struggles and how difficult it can be. But in both of your new courses, you talk about how conflict can be constructive for teams. So I'd love to hear from each of you. How do we do that? How do we move to a more constructive place with conflict? Ron, I'll have you answer out first.
Well, so conflict, I mean, to Natalie's point from before, conflict is the raw material of innovation, right? You need those differences to spark new ideas. As human beings, we're comfort-seeking machines. We associate conflict with bloodshed and estrangement and all these bad things, and we're not skilled at it. And so one of the things cross-functional efforts have to begin with is, what are the ground rules we're going to disagree? And when that happens, how are we going to manage that and and practice? I make my clients rehearse their first difference. I make them actually practice out loud their first conflict. and work it through so they can get all the jumbled, mumbled, long wind-ups and evasion tactics or overly bluntness, all the things that they're inclined to do out of the way. And find the groove that says, I'm going to be respectful, I'm going to be direct, I'm going to be concise, I'm going to be curious and empathic and clear. And I'm going to, and when there is conflict, to isolate what it is. So in my course, I talk about facts, values, methods, and goals. The what, the why, the how, and the where, right? Because often if you have a significant other or a spouse, you've been in a situation where you're fighting over something you have no idea what you're fighting over, right? And you're like, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
And it's always about something else. And listen, collaboration efforts are transference parties, right? Suddenly you're my gym teacher from 7th grade. We're all casting each other's stories in different parts of the movie, right? And if you don't know when you're triggered by somebody's behavior and you don't know how you respond to them or why you respond to them that way, you're going to bring all that nonsense to the forefront. So you've got to work out how you're going to manage all that. And then you have to be able to say, okay, we're not disagreeing about everything here. Facts, values, methods, and goals. Where do we actually agree? Right? And isolate the places where there's difference, but build it on common ground. Because it's very rare that we disagree about everything. We'll fight as if we do, but rarely do we actually disagree. So get the ground rules clear, practice up front, isolate where there's common ground, and know when your own triggers are going to get into play here and what you're going to bring to the table and how you're going to respond in productive ways.
Yeah. Natalie, what are your thoughts?
Well, what I love about Ron's example of the role play is that he's really helping people to build the muscle memory to be attuned to how they feel. And as much as we've been in this conversation talking about deliverables and accountability and KPIs and deadlines, when you work collaboratively, it is a very human process where feelings come up. Am I being seen and heard? Do my ideas seem to matter? Am I getting credit? How does it feel when I have to share the stage with this person? The feelings are very real. And so I think that that's actually very important to touch on. I think you're hearing a theme about the way I think about organizational design and about change management. I reference that organizations are organisms. And the more in this time of ubiquitous technology, AI, robotics, automation, where basic tasks are being taken over, the opportunity in our work today, and especially in the future of work, is to amplify what makes us uniquely human, is to lean in to the stickiness and what we can yield when we are interacting on a very human level. So a lot of that role play is helping us to acknowledge this doesn't feel good. I don't feel respected. I feel great when this happens. It feels so amazing that we came to this conclusion together. So any opportunity we have to lean into that is awesome, because that is actually our value proposition in a world where so much of work gladly is there's offload, there's cognitive offload for me. But I reference in my course the work of Jerry Hirschberg, excuse me. He used to be the head of design at Nissan Automotive, and he made up a term called creative abrasion, where he would purposefully require his design team to also, he would bring in people from finance and HR and marketing and manufacturing to opine on their design problem-solving process. And typically they were hands on the hips, they were crossed arms initially, because we all have the same reaction. What do they know about what we do? Why do we have to work with them? He wisely understood that friction, that abrasion, at the end of the day yields energy. So why not convert that energy into something positive? So that's another valuable reason to bring in perspectives from other parts of a company or even the sector. But the other thing I like to do when I build out actionable roadmaps for teams to work on projects going forward is I have them identify, and this is kind of a different type of forecasting than what Ron was talking about, but to identify who will be our accountability partners, What will be the barriers and roadblocks that we're going to hit? Because we're going to hit them. So let's try to forecast them in advance. And what will our elixir be? What will be the magic potion? If it's a mantra, if it's some sort of all hands, if it's some sort of a physical activity that we can walk away, zoom out in order to zoom back in, and just the process of identifying and acknowledging the problems that could arise in advance does wonders to be able to move through the conflict just by identifying in advance, mentally, through discussion, bodily, through that role play, what those points of conflict could be.
Yeah, one sort of theme that I'm noticing through this conversation is just how can you operate as a team in a more direct way and in a more conscious way? Because again, if you haven't built the skill of conflict, then you're going to avoid conflict. And then you're going to go back channel and you're going to tell your boss, you're going to tell the other people on your team, you're going to tell the people you're already comfortable with, all of the things that annoy you about what this other team or other person is doing, versus having, again, in the same way that you're like, collaboration can be ambiguous. We are going to probably have conflict. Like, let's proactively think about that and work towards that. When you mentioned jargon, Natalie, it made me think about vulnerability and how one thing that I think can be challenging on a cross-functional team is sometimes the performativity of, I know everything, I have everything together, that hyper sort of competence, without necessarily, then being comfortable enough to say like, wait, what does that acronym mean? Or that hurt my feelings, or, so we have just a few minutes, but I'd also love to hear from both of you. Like, how do you think we can actually build? I think all of the things you've talked about could do this, but what are concrete ways to build trust and allow for a little bit of vulnerability on a team so people can directly and consciously address some of these issues that can come up? Ron, what do you think? And then Natalie.
Yeah. Well, first of all, and again, I want to thank you, Amanda, for convening both of us. When I was out in California and we were filming on the same day as Natalie, I was so excited that LinkedIn was building a body of knowledge on this topic. And I watched both of our courses, Natalie. The viewership so quickly says, Amanda, you were right. You hit a nerve that this is needed. So I'm so excited. The thing that, as you were talking before about the vulnerability issue, I think one of the ways you have to build trust is by stopping collusion. You can't, the minute somebody comes to you and says, oh my gosh, Amanda, can you believe Natalie said that in the meeting?
Yeah.
You need to say, we're not going to do this.
Go talk to her. Yeah.
And now that you've invited me, either you talk to her or I'm going to tell you talk to me. Because we're not going to, because every piece of collusion you allow breaks the fabric of trust. And when that becomes the norm, direct communication becomes too much of an exception. So you've got to nip collusion in the bud as one of the early ground rules. The other thing I think I'm working with an executive team right now. I'm actually headed to India this weekend. They're a global team. They're a very new team. And part of what creates trust is when I know your story. And so, you didn't just arrive into the world on this project or on this cross-functional requirement here, right? So if I don't know who you are, I'm going to make you up in my head. I'm going to concoct you. And then when we have a room full of concoctions, there's nobody to exchange trust with. I'm just exchanging trust with my version of you. And so get to know each other. Give people a set of prompts around what they're passionate about, why they're here, what they suck at, where they need help. Right? Like get the vulnerability question out from the very beginning, saying, how can this team help you be successful? And make them create their own news story of this team by letting people know who they are. Once you know each other's stories, I don't have to create a new version of you. Right now, I have the real thing, and you have the real version of me. And the foundation of trust has got to be from that authentic place of I know who you are, versus I know what I've made you up to be, and now all I'm going to do is collect information that reinforces what I've made you up to be. So know each other's stories. Start at the very beginning by exchanging the right information that allows you to know and see each other for who you are.
Yeah, that's great, Natalie.
I love that, Ron, and I think that it's easy to say, let's share our stories, and there's been so much silencing and erasure in a lot of organizations where people don't feel like people really care. So this is where, to your point, Ron, as a leader, as a manager, if someone begins to collude and does the negative Nancy and gossip mill, you intervene, you nip it in the bud, and you ask them to talk to the person directly. And if they don't have the tools, maybe it's a conversation you have to mediate. Mm-hmm. But I think so much of leadership has to model that storytelling that we're asking for. So if we're asking people to be vulnerable and tell their stories, as managers, as leaders, it's very important to be able to not just share your greatest hits, your humble brag, your best of, but to kind of dig a little bit deeper and share not just who I am, but what happened to me. And I'm referencing the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who co-authored the book of Oprah Winfrey about, we shouldn't be asking people, why are you like that? Or why did you do that? But the question actually should be, what happened to you, right? Mm-hmm. And that right there could be a really interesting starting place for a session on the collaborative project to really understand individual stories and for people to collectively share that vulnerability. Again, starting with the leader, them not just asking for you to share the story, but for them to be able to share something that happened to them about why I chose this pathway to do this work. Some of the things that have happened to me that aren't, necessarily my most golden moments. And I think that kind of lays the field. The other part of building trust, I kind of full circle back to the beginning of our conversation, but building trust does start with that curiosity of understanding. And there's a woman named Laura Goodson or Laura Godson, I might be mispronouncing her last name, who is the founder of a company called Now, but she talks about how we need to notice more than know. And that's another way of talking about leaning into understanding people.
Yeah. I really resonate with that idea that leadership needs to model vulnerability. And it's something that I've seen. I've had many really wonderful managers, and I've seen managers be, really towing that line, but like that Goldilocks amount of vulnerability. And it makes such a huge difference in terms of everyone else feeling comfortable and even recognizing that this is a space where I need to be vulnerable. But while you were sharing, I just, I thought of this old chestnut, like taking time to make time, like taking time at the outset of a project to not only think, what's our ultimate objective, our mission, what's the ultimate value we each create and we create together, but also taking time to recognize one another as human beings by sharing a little bit about each other, like getting to know one another, opening up to each other, and how ultimately that does take a little bit more time at the outset, but ultimately saves you a lot of time because people feel more comfortable to be direct with one another, to feel comfortable to be creative, to be innovative, to share. Any last thoughts or anything that sparked for you, Ron, while Natalie was sharing?
Well, I think she's absolutely right. Leaders have to go first.
Yeah.
And they have to set the example and set the expectation, right? That this is how we're going to operate as a team. And they also have to say, and I'm going to screw up. And when I do, I need you to tell me.
Yeah.
They have to make that invitation clear that they want to get better. I think when you set humanity first as part of a group of people to say, none of us are perfect. What we're doing has never been done before. So every time we're together, there's a precedent being set. The odds are against us that it's going to go well every time. So let's just accept that now. And when it doesn't go well, when we skin our knees, let's show each other grace. And also, let's not withhold information that can help us get better. It's never kind to not want to hurt somebody's feelings with feedback. It's just selfish and cruel. If you have information that can help somebody get better, find a kind way to share it with them. And let's make that the norm, that when we're done with this effort, or when this effort is in motion as a cross-functional seam together, we can say we left the organization better than we found it, and we can say the organization left us better than it found us.
Yeah, I like that idea too, that sort of remembering like you're a human being, not just when you leave work, but you're also a human being who's developing as a human being and developing valuable skills while you're at work too.
And you can help each other do that.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it has been an absolute treasure of a conversation and a delight to speak with both of you. Very excited about your new courses. So Ron's new LinkedIn Learning course is Effective Collaboration Across Teams. I will drop a link in the chat to it. And Natalie's new course is Managing Cross-Functional Collaboration as a Leader. They're both wonderful titles and I highly recommend them. And it was so wonderful to chat with both of you today. So thank you for the time. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Thank you, Amanda, so much. Thank you for your work. It's been such a pleasure. Appreciate all your support.
Of course, my
Thank
joy.
you very much. Thank you.
All right. Bye, friends.